History has seen bravery, brilliance, and people who thought fire was a good way to clean a city. 1. The Chicago Fire Blame Game, 1871. When half of Chicago burned to the ground, someone had to take the fall. And who better than a cow? Legend says Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern, turning an entire city into a barbecue. It was the perfect scapegoat, a literal scapegoat with udders. The truth? No one actually knows what started it. Could have been careless smokers, rowdy drunks, or even spontaneous combustion, because apparently 19th century Chicago was that flammable. But blaming a cow? That's peak human logic. Our city burned, so let's vilify the dairy industry. Decades later, the city officially cleared the O'Leary family's name, but by then, the cow had already become an immortal meme in American history, proof that when disaster strikes, humanity's first response is find the nearest animal and blame it. 2. The London Beer Flood, 1814. Imagine walking through London and suddenly being swept away by beer. No, not the dream, the disaster. In 1814, a giant vat at the Moo Brewery exploded, releasing more than 320,000 gallons of porter into the streets. It knocked down walls, flooded basements, and tragically killed several people, most of whom probably died doing what we'd all do, trying to drink their way out of it. The brewery blamed acts of God, which is corporate code for "we definitely built that tank with duct tape." The stench lingered for weeks, and local pubs had the audacity to raise prices right after, claiming shortage. It was the only time in history when getting wasted was both a civic duty and a survival strategy. 3. The Great Molasses Flood, 1919. Because nothing says tragic absurdity like drowning in dessert. In Boston's North End, a massive storage tank full of molasses burst open, releasing a sticky tsunami that flattened buildings, crushed freight trains, and moved fast enough to kill 21 people. Locals described it as a brown wave of doom, which sounds like a rejected Willy Wonka plotline. Cleanup took months. Firefighters literally hosed down the streets with salt water, turning Boston Harbor into a giant pancake topping. The company blamed temperature changes, but engineers later discovered the tank was so poorly built that workers used to joke they could hear it groan. Nobody listened. The city learned 2 lessons that day. 1. Molasses moves faster than you think. And 2. Never underestimate humanity's ability to turn breakfast ingredients into weapons of mass destruction. 4. The Dancing Plague of 1518. In the summer of 1518, the citizens of Strasbourg, France, discovered a brand new form of cardio. Uncontrollable, possibly fatal, spontaneous dancing. It started with one woman boogieing solo in the street. No music, no reason, just pure medieval groove. Within a week, dozens joined her. Within a month, hundreds were dancing themselves into exhaustion, seizures, and even death. Authorities, in their infinite wisdom, didn't stop the madness. They hired musicians and built a stage to help them dance it out, because nothing solves a public health crisis like adding a DJ. Doctors called it hot blood, which is basically 1500 slang for "we have no idea." The epidemic ended as suddenly as it began, leaving historians forever baffled and proving that even 5 centuries ago, people could literally dance themselves to death trying to shake off their problems. 5. The Great Eruption of Krakatoa, 1883. When Krakatoa blew in 1883, it didn't just destroy an island, it destroyed the sound barrier. The explosion was so loud it circled the Earth 4 times and was heard 3,000 miles away. Imagine sitting in Australia and saying, "What was that noise?" And it's Indonesia disintegrating. The blast created tsunamis, wiped out villages, and literally changed the color of sunsets for years. Artists thought the world had turned into a permanent Instagram filter. Meanwhile, newspapers printed it like a fun fact. A volcano makes big boom. The planet's temperature dropped globally, crops failed, and scientists learned the phrase climate consequences. Yet, despite the scale of the destruction, the event inspired one of the first viral weather phenomena, people sending postcards bragging about the weird red skies. Because even in the 19th century, humans couldn't resist flexing about disasters. 6. Napoleon's Rabbit Massacre, 1807. After signing a peace treaty, Napoleon decided to celebrate with a massive rabbit hunt, because apparently world domination wasn't enough sport. His chief of staff ordered hundreds of rabbits for the event, But the supplier, in a stroke of comedic genius, bought tame farm rabbits instead of wild ones. When Napoleon and his men showed up ready for the hunt, the rabbits were released and immediately charged toward them, thinking they were there for feeding time. An army of cuddly, hungry fluffballs swarmed the Emperor of France, climbing into his carriage and gnawing at his coat. Witnesses said Napoleon fled the field, attacked by thousands of rabbits. History books call it an embarrassment. Let's be real, it was the universe's most adorable coup d'etat. 7. The Halifax Explosion, 1917. It was supposed to be a normal day in Halifax, Nova Scotia, until two ships collided in the harbor, one of which happened to be carrying 3,000 tons of explosives. The blast was so massive it instantly vaporized the ship, leveled the city, and created the largest man-made explosion before the atomic age. Windows shattered 50 miles away, and the shockwave knocked people clean out of their shoes. The crew's attempt to warn the city didn't help. They literally rowed toward shore shouting, "She's gonna blow!" Because of course they did. To add insult to injury, a blizzard hit the next day, burying survivors in snow. The official takeaway: when transporting TNT through a crowded harbor, maybe don't get distracted waving to another ship. 8. The Year Without a Summer, 1816. Picture this. It's June, but it's snowing. In 1816, after the eruption of Mount Tambora, global temperatures dropped so dramatically that summer basically clocked out early. Crops failed, livestock died, and people in New England started eating sawdust bread. Yes, actual sawdust. The sky stayed gray for months, giving everything a creepy, apocalyptic glow. Birds migrated in circles, rivers froze in July, and everyone thought the world was ending. On the bright side, one bored vacationer named Mary Shelley was trapped indoors in Switzerland and decided to write Frankenstein. So yes, an entire summer was canceled, humanity starved, and climate panic gripped the world. But at least we got Gothic literature out of it. Proof that even planetary chaos can't stop a writer's deadline. 9. The Exploding Whale of Oregon, 1970. Sometimes history gives us moments so profoundly stupid they achieve immortality. In 1970, a dead whale washed up on the Oregon coast. It was too big to bury and too smelly to ignore. So, state engineers had a brilliant idea. Let's blow it up. They packed the carcass with half a ton of dynamite, assuming the pieces would gently fall into the ocean. Spoiler, they did not. The explosion sent giant chunks of blubber flying for hundreds of feet, crushing cars, splattering spectators, and coating the nearby town in rancid whale meat. One man's new Cadillac was flattened by a 200-pound airborne steak. The smell lingered for days. Local news captured the entire debacle, ensuring it lived forever as the greatest government experiment in what did you think was going to happen? History. 10. The Great Emu War, 1932. Australia once went to war against birds. After World War I, farmers faced a new enemy: 20,000 emus rampaging through wheat fields like feathery tanks. The government responded with machine guns and lost. The emus outran the soldiers, scattered in all directions, and basically turned the outback into a live-action cartoon. The troops burned through thousands of rounds of ammo, hitting almost nothing. One general admitted, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, we'd rule the world." The birds eventually won the war, forcing the government to retreat and build fences instead. To this day, Australians remember it as the time their army was defeated by overgrown poultry. Humanity, 0, nature, 1. 11. The Great St. Pierre Eruption, 1902. St. Pierre, Martinique, was known as the Paris of the Caribbean. Then Mount Pelée reminded everyone that living next to a volcano is basically playing geological roulette. In May 1902, the mountain erupted with such force it vaporized the city in minutes, killing 30,000 people and leaving only 2 known survivors. One was a tailor. The other was a convicted murderer sitting in a thick-walled prison cell. He survived because his cell had no windows, effectively turning it into a doomsday bunker. When rescuers found him days later, he reportedly asked for a cigarette. He later toured the world as the man who lived through hell, proving that sometimes being in jail is the safest place to be, at least when your city decides to explode. 12. The Great Boston Fire, caused by rats, 1872. Most fires have logical causes: candles, stoves, carelessness. The Boston Fire of 1872? Blame rats and horsehair. A warehouse storing animal hair for wig making, because apparently that was a booming business, became home to a horde of rats who gnawed through oil-soaked barrels. One spark later, the entire downtown turned into an inferno. Firefighters had brand new horse-drawn steam engines, but most of the city's fire alarms were disabled to prevent false calls. Because, of course, bureaucracy never sleeps. It took 2 days to control the blaze, which wiped out nearly 800 buildings. The insurance companies called it an act of God. Translation: we're not paying for this. So, to recap, wigs, rats, and oil created one of the worst fires in American history. It's like the universe was conducting a live demonstration of flammable stupidity. 13. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge Collapse, 1940. When engineers built the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, they called it an architectural marvel. The locals called it Galloping Gertie. Why? Because the bridge didn't just sway in the wind, it danced. From day one, it twisted like a ribbon at the slightest breeze. Drivers reported seasickness. One man even took his dog across for fun until November 7, 1940, when a 40-mph gust turned the bridge into an Olympic gymnast. It bent, twisted, and finally tore itself apart in one of the most cinematic engineering fails ever filmed. The dog didn't make it, but the footage became legendary. The disaster taught engineers the concept of aerodynamic resonance. But for everyone else, it was proof that sometimes bridges need less poetry and more math. 14. The Great Toilet Paper Panic, 1973. You'd think panic buying toilet paper was a 2020 invention. Nope, America already lost its mind over Charmin in the 70s. It started with a Johnny Carson joke. The late-night host mentioned a looming toilet paper shortage, completely as a gag. But Americans, never ones to risk their hygiene, stampeded grocery stores and emptied every shelf in the country within days. Factories had to triple production just to keep up. It took weeks for Carson to go on air and apologize, clarifying that it was, indeed, a joke. But by then, the damage was done, and America had officially experienced its first great toilet paper recession. Moral of the story: never underestimate the national power of mild inconvenience and late-night TV. 15. The Chernobyl Safety Test, 1986. You know what's always a good idea? Turning off safety systems in a nuclear reactor. For science. Chernobyl's meltdown began during what was literally called a safety test. The crew disabled emergency mechanisms to see how long the reactor could run without them. Spoiler, not long. The reactor exploded, spreading radioactive dust across Europe. Officials downplayed it, holding a May Day parade under a literal cloud of fallout. The Soviet Union spent years covering up the disaster, but the truth eventually leaked, glowing slightly. It remains the most expensive oops in human history, and the ultimate warning that if your safety experiment begins with "Don't worry, we've turned off the alarms," it's probably time to go home. 16. The Great Fire of London, 1666. In 1666, London learned that building an entire city out of wood and hay was, shockingly, a bad idea. The fire started in a bakery on Pudding Lane, which sounds adorable until you realize it destroyed 13,000 houses. The blaze raged for 4 days, consuming cathedrals, homes, and nearly every sausage stand in town. The king's solution? Form a bucket brigade and pray. The fire wiped out most of the medieval city, but somehow only 6 confirmed deaths, either because people escaped or because record-keeping was also on fire. Out of the ashes came new fire codes, stone buildings, and the modern insurance industry. Because if there's one thing civilization learns from disaster, it's how to charge people for it later. 17. The Great Dust Bowl, 1930s. Imagine trying to survive a sandstorm that lasts a decade. Welcome to the Great Dust Bowl, when America's farmland turned into a giant, choking sandbox thanks to drought, bad farming, and pure optimism. Farmers plowed away natural grass, wind took the soil, and suddenly Kansas was on Mars. People stuffed wet rags in windows to breathe, cars needed masks, and entire towns vanished under dunes. Newspapers described black blizzards so thick you couldn't see your hand. The government finally sent scientists to explain what went wrong. Their verdict: maybe stop removing all the plants. It was the first time America learned that you can't negotiate with dirt, and that just add water doesn't work when the clouds have moved to Canada. 18. The Tanganyika Laughter Epidemic, 1962. A boarding school in Tanzania became ground zero for one of history's strangest pandemics: uncontrollable laughter. It started with 3 girls giggling, then spread to 95 students. The laughter lasted hours, then days, then months. Classes shut down, teachers fled. Nearby villages caught the infection. Doctors ruled out disease, calling it mass psychogenic illness, which is science speak for everyone lost their mind simultaneously. The outbreak eventually burned out after 6 months, but the mystery remains unsolved. Was it stress, spiritual hysteria, boredom? Whatever it was, it left behind the world's weirdest health tip. Sometimes laughter isn't the best medicine. It's the symptom. 19. The Great Train Wreck of Paris, 1895. Imagine a train crashing through a station wall, flying across the street, and landing nose first in a bakery. It actually happened in Paris, 1895. The engineer was running late, and, apparently, running from common sense. The brakes failed. The locomotive plowed through the station, smashed the facade, and dangled from the building like a Looney Tunes sketch. Miraculously, only one person died, the poor woman working in the bakery below. The wreck became so iconic it's been recreated in movies, art, and even Lego. It's the perfect historical metaphor for human progress. We can harness steam power, master engineering, and still find new ways to launch ourselves into a pastry shop. 20. The Great Smog of London, 1952. For 5 days in December, London became a gas chamber, and not the poetic kind. A cold front trapped coal smoke over the city, turning daylight into darkness. Buses crashed, concerts stopped mid-song, and people literally couldn't see their own feet. Visibility dropped to 1 foot. Cows suffocated in barns. Theater performances were canceled because the audience couldn't see the actors, and the actors couldn't see the stage. Officially, 4,000 people died. Later studies say closer to 12,000. The government responded with revolutionary insight. Maybe burning tons of coal in fog isn't ideal. Thus was born the Clean Air Act, and proof that sometimes it takes a city turning into Mordor for politicians to notice the air looks like soup. 21. The Boston Molasses Trial, 1919 and 1925. Remember that sticky molasses tsunami from earlier? Well, it didn't end when the streets were finally hosed down. It ended in court. The victims sued the company, which tried to blame anarchists, vibrations, and even acts of God. Their defense was basically, the tank just exploded itself. The judge didn't buy it. Turns out, the tank was so badly built, workers said they could hear it sing. The company paid over $600,000 in damages, the modern equivalent of around $10 million, and for years afterward, Boston's North End still smelled like syrup every time it rained. Imagine explaining to future generations, Grandpa didn't fight in the war. He survived the desert flood. It's the only time in history people had to testify under oath about being attacked by breakfast. 22. The Great Blizzard of 1888. Before Doppler radar and smartphones, weather forecasts were basically educated guesses, or prayers. So when the Great Blizzard of 1888 hit New York, no one saw it coming. Within hours, 50 inches of snow buried the city. Trains froze mid-track. People tunneled through drifts to reach grocery stores. Entire telegraph lines collapsed, cutting off communication between states. One New Yorker famously sent a note to the mayor reading, "We are dying of elegance," after trying to walk through the storm in top hats and opera coats. It was chaos wrapped in white. But out of the disaster came a solution: underground subways. Because if you can't beat the weather, you build under it, preferably with a roof that doesn't snow on your head while you're ordering bagels. 23. The London Beer Riot, 1748. Long before Oktoberfest, Londoners proved they didn't need a festival to riot over booze. In 1748, when a tax increase hit their beloved gin, thousands of angry citizens stormed breweries shouting, "No gin, no peace." The government sent soldiers, who immediately got drunk too. The riot turned into a citywide pub crawl with minor property damage and maximum inebriation. The chaos only stopped when they literally ran out of alcohol. Parliament learned 2 lessons. Don't mess with people's gin, and definitely don't send soldiers to stop them if the bar's still open. Historians now call it the day London forgot what sober meant, which sounds like the title of a particularly British hangover movie. 24. The Tunguska Event, 1908, Russia, 1908. A bright flash lights up the sky. Moments later, an explosion flattens 800 square miles of Siberian forest, but leaves no crater. Witnesses reported a fireball brighter than the sun, and trees falling outward in perfect symmetry, like God sneezed. Scientists theorized a meteor exploded mid-air, releasing 1,000 times the energy of Hiroshima. Others, of course, blamed aliens. It took decades for an expedition to even reach the site because, fun fact, Siberia is mostly uninhabitable on purpose. The event remains a mystery wrapped in fire and conspiracy theories. Whatever it was, it reminded humanity that space occasionally likes to throw rocks at us just to keep things interesting. 25. The Hindenburg Disaster, 1937. Once upon a time, airships were the future of luxury travel, floating hotels gliding across continents, until one went kaboom. The Hindenburg, a German Zeppelin filled with hydrogen, a gas famous for exploding, caught fire while docking in New Jersey. Within 30 seconds, it turned into a fiery skeleton raining molten metal. 36 people died, and the radio announcer's horrified cry, "Oh, the humanity!" became one of history's most haunting soundbites. The disaster ended the age of airships forever. Ironically, the Hindenburg's passengers had chosen it because it was considered safer than airplanes. That day, everyone learned the hard way that when your travel plans involve a massive flying balloon full of flammable gas, maybe spring for the train. 26. The Great Potato Famine, 1845–1852, Ireland, mid-1800s. A fungal blight wiped out potato crops, the main food source for millions. The result was famine, death, and mass migration that reshaped global history. The tragedy was worsened by bureaucracy. The British government refused to intervene at first, believing market forces would sort it out. Spoiler, they did not. Over 1 million people died, and another million fled overseas, many to America. It's one of the darkest examples of how human arrogance can amplify natural disaster. On the bright side, if you can call it that, it gave the world Irish pubs, St. Patrick's Day parades, and an entire cultural identity built on resilience, and justified side-eye toward any government that uses the phrase minimal interference. 27. The Boston Smallpox Party, 1721. In 1721, smallpox was ravaging Boston. People were dying by the thousands. But when doctors introduced a crude early form of vaccination, called inoculation, involving actual pus, the public freaked out. One pastor named Cotton Mather supported it and got rewarded with a literal bomb thrown through his window and a note reading, "You dog, damn you, I'll inoculate you with this." The town split in two, Team Science and Team Don't Touch Me with That Needle. Eventually, data proved the treatment worked. Infection rates dropped dramatically, but not before Boston briefly turned into the 18th century version of a Facebook comment war. Moral: humans have always been bad at science until it's too late. 28. The Great Mississippi Flood, 1927. They called it the mother of all floods, and for once, no one was exaggerating. The Mississippi River swallowed 27,000 square miles. That's basically an entire small country underwater. Towns vanished. People camped on rooftops waiting for rescue boats. The government's response? Save the cotton plantations first. They even blew up levees to protect rich landowners, drowning entire poor communities in the process. It displaced over 600,000 people, mostly sharecroppers, and exposed the ugly reality of who America cared to save. But it also gave birth to the blues as a cultural voice of suffering and survival. Out of the mud and misery came music that defined a century. The river took homes, but it gave the world soul. 29. The San Francisco Earthquake, 1906. It started with a jolt at 5:12 a.m., and by breakfast, San Francisco looked like someone had shaken it like an Etch-a-Sketch. The 7.9 magnitude earthquake leveled buildings, snapped gas lines, and sparked fires that burned for 4 straight days. Firefighters, running out of water, resorted to dynamite to stop the flames, an idea that worked about as well as you'd expect. Half the city vanished, and newspapers called it the dawn of a new San Francisco, which is a poetic way of saying, "We blew it up twice." Still, the city rebuilt fast, proving that nothing can stop Californians from putting houses right back on top of the same fault line that just destroyed them. 30. The Great Train Robbery That Failed Spectacularly, 1963. Britain's most famous heist was supposed to be criminal genius in motion. 15 men hijack a B yacht, Royal Mail train and steal $2.6 million. The plan worked perfectly until it didn't. They left fingerprints on everything, hid in a farmhouse a mile from the crime scene, and spent their loot on sports cars and plastic surgery. One guy even bought a house under the name Mr. Robber. The police solved the case in record time. The gang became folk heroes anyway, proof that in the 1960s, British society would forgive almost anything as long as you wore a nice suit and looked cool while committing felonies. 31. The Great Chicago Heat Wave, 1995. It wasn't an earthquake or a flood. It was just heat. Unrelenting, invisible, and merciless. Over 5 days, temperatures soared past 106 degrees F, melting asphalt and overloading the city's power grid. Air conditioning failed, emergency lines jammed, and the government shrugged, calling it a seasonal anomaly. When it was over, more than 700 people had died. The tragedy revealed a brutal truth. Disaster doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it just knocks out your fan. In true American fashion, the official report blamed communication issues. Translation: the city forgot to check on its residents until the obituary section did. 32. The Boston Molasses Redux, the Revenge of Sticky History, 1959. You'd think Boston had learned its lesson after drowning in sugar once. Nope. In 1959, another storage tank burst, this time full of corn syrup. It flooded an entire candy factory, coating machinery, walls, and employees in caramelized chaos. Workers had to be cut free with industrial steam hoses. Reporters dubbed it Molasses 2, the sequel nobody wanted. The company's PR team called it a viscosity malfunction, which is corporate code for "we didn't tighten the lid." Boston officially became the only city on Earth where you could slip on dessert twice in 1 century. 33. The Tri-State Tornado, 1925. This tornado wasn't content with one town. It wanted 3 states. Cutting a 219-mile path through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, it remains the deadliest in U.S. history. Winds over 300 mph flattened schools, farms, and entire neighborhoods. The twister was so fast it outran telegraph warnings, leaving people literally watching the sky spin apart before they could blink. Survivors described chickens being stripped of feathers midair and locomotives thrown like toys. The only silver lining? It inspired the creation of modern storm tracking systems. The downside? We still haven't found a way to stop naming tornadoes like roller coasters. 34. The Pepsi Navy Disaster, 1989. Yes, this really happened. In the late Cold War, Pepsi struck a deal with the Soviet Union. They'd trade soda syrup for warships and submarines. For one surreal moment, Pepsi owned the world's 6th largest navy. Then came the problem. What do you do with 17 submarines and a cruiser when your business is selling cola? Pepsi quietly sold the vessels for scrap, but not before the CEO joked, "We're disarming the USSR faster than the US government." Historians call it corporate diplomacy. Everyone else calls it capitalism on caffeine. 35. The Catastrophe of the Dancing Bears, 1916. During a Russian circus performance in 1916, a trainer thought it'd be fun to teach 2 brown bears how to ride bicycles. Everything went fine until one bear spotted a spectator eating popcorn. The bear lunged, the second bear panicked, and chaos erupted. The crowd stampeded out, the tent caught fire, and the local newspaper described it as a brisk demonstration of barely controlled enthusiasm. No one died, but several bicycles were never seen again. Moral of the story: if history has taught us anything, it's that you should never combine wild animals, wheels, and snacks in the same event. 36. The Great Blackout of 1965. New Yorkers were halfway through dinner when the lights went out. And not just theirs, entire chunks of the US and Canada went dark. One small relay station near Niagara Falls had failed, and within seconds, 30 million people were plunged into darkness. The subway froze, elevators stalled, and the city turned into a candlelit panic. But here's the twist: crime rates actually dropped. Instead, people shared flashlights, helped strangers, and even started impromptu block parties. 9 months later, the birth rate spiked. Apparently, when the power goes out, romance powers on. So, in the end, the Great Blackout wasn't a disaster. It was a 25,000 square mile date night. 37. The Great Horse Manure Crisis, 1894. Before cars, cities ran on horses, and horses, unfortunately, ran on digestion. By the 1890s, New York was drowning in manure, 100,000 horses producing 2.5 million pounds of it per day. Streets reeked, flies swarmed, and newspapers predicted the city would be buried under 9 feet of dung within 50 years. Experts held an international summit to solve the manure problem, only to give up after 3 days. Then, Henry Ford came along with the automobile, solving one problem by inventing traffic jams, oil spills, and road rage. So yes, the car saved us from drowning in poop, and immediately replaced it with smog. Progress. 38. The Space Potato Incident, 1965. During the height of the space race, NASA scientists wanted to test how food decomposed in zero gravity. Their brilliant plan: launch a potato into orbit aboard an unmanned capsule. Unfortunately, when the capsule re-entered, it crashed in rural Mississippi. Locals discovered a charred metal object and, thinking it was an alien craft, called the authorities. Panic spread so fast that newspapers ran headlines like "Space Monster Lands in Field." When NASA confirmed it was just a burned potato, the town declared it a close encounter of the starch kind. To this day, old-timers in Mississippi still refer to it as the night the potato came from space. 39. The Great Tanganyika Earthquake. Fish Apocalypse, 1939, Lake Tanganyika. In Africa is one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world, and in 1939 it briefly became the world's largest fish stew. A powerful earthquake rocked the region, triggering underwater gas pockets to erupt and suffocate millions of fish. Locals described the lake boiling with death. Scientists called it limnic eruption. Fishermen called it free lunch. Entire villages cooked fish for weeks, and the air smelled like a seafood buffet cooked by Poseidon himself. Decades later, scientists finally understood what happened. But the moral was simple: if your lake suddenly starts bubbling, maybe don't go swimming. 40. The Great Balloon Disaster, 1986. Cleveland wanted to break a world record. The plan: release 1.5 million helium balloons into the sky for charity. It was beautiful for about 10 minutes. Then the wind changed. The balloons drifted back down, clogging streets, covering Lake Erie, and grounding air traffic. Hospitals couldn't airlift patients. Horses panicked. And the Coast Guard spent days searching for 2 missing boaters, because the entire lake was covered in floating balloons that looked like human heads. It was chaos disguised as whimsy. The event was officially renamed Balloon Fest '86, but locals remember it as the day Cleveland learned gravity. 41. The Great Maple Syrup Heist, 2012. Yes, Canada's biggest crime involved breakfast. Over 6 months, thieves siphoned nearly 3,000 tons of maple syrup, worth $18 million, from a Quebec warehouse. They replaced the stolen syrup with water and hoped no one would notice. They did. It triggered the largest investigation in Canadian history, complete with undercover operations and syrup-sniffing dogs. The culprits were eventually caught, but not before becoming folk heroes. The media called it the sweetest crime in history, and for once, no one disagreed. If you ever wanted proof that Canadians take pancakes seriously enough to commit organized crime, this is it. 42. The Whale That Exploded in the Street, 2004. Tainan, Taiwan. A massive 60-ton sperm whale washed ashore. Instead of dissecting it at sea, scientists decided to haul it through downtown on a flatbed truck. What could possibly go wrong? As it sat under the hot sun, gases built up inside. Mid-transport, the whale exploded. The blast showered buildings, cars, and unlucky pedestrians with entrails. People literally slipped on whale guts in the street. News crews showed up, and the footage went viral before viral videos were even a thing. The scientists blamed unexpected internal pressure. Everyone else blamed hubris. Moral: never underestimate the explosive potential of marine biology. 43. The Metric Conversion Crash, 1999. NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter was a $125 million triumph of engineering, until it wasn't. The probe burned up in Mars's atmosphere because one team used metric units while another used imperial. That's right, humanity lost a spacecraft because someone didn't convert inches to centimeters. The official report called it a unit mismatch. The rest of us call it the most expensive math error in history. Somewhere, a high school physics teacher probably felt vindicated for every time they shouted, "Check your units." The lesson? When exploring another planet, maybe start by agreeing on the measuring tape. 44. The Deadly Olympic Marathon, 1904. The St. Louis Olympics featured what might be the dumbest marathon ever staged. Runners started in 90-degree heat on dusty, unpaved roads shared with cars kicking up clouds of exhaust. The organizers thought water breaks were unscientific, so there were only 2 stations along the 26-mile route. One runner nearly died after drinking contaminated water. Another got stomach cramps from eating apples he found on the roadside. The winner hitched a ride in a car for part of the race, waved to fans from the window, and still got the gold medal, until someone snitched. The event was so disastrous that it's a miracle any athlete ever signed up again. It wasn't a marathon. It was a public health experiment sponsored by pure negligence. 45. The Soviet nuke. That almost was 1983. One September night, Soviet radar showed 5 U.S. nuclear missiles inbound. Protocol said to launch a counterstrike immediately. The officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, hesitated. Something didn't add up. Instead of obeying orders, he did nothing. Minutes passed. The missiles vanished from the screen. It was a sensor glitch. His refusal to follow the rules likely prevented World War III. He was reprimanded for not filling out paperwork correctly. Imagine that. The man who saved the world got written up for bad handwriting. Petrov's calm skepticism is the reason we're not all living in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is absolutely nothing. 46. The whale oil panic, 1850s. Before electricity, the world ran on whale oil. And by ran, I mean burned to smell like fish. But when whales started disappearing, global panic set in. Prices skyrocketed. Newspapers warned civilization would go dark. Then, a Canadian chemist discovered kerosene, and overnight, humanity collectively said, "Who needs whales anyway?" Entire economies flipped from harpoons to oil rigs in less than a decade. Environmentalists later called it the first great energy transition. The whales called it, finally, some peace and quiet. It's the rare historical disaster that fixed itself because humans accidentally invented something worse. 47. The exploding toilet epidemic, 1970s. In the 1970s, American manufacturers introduced pressurized toilets promising stronger flush power. What they delivered was indoor artillery. The pressure tanks had a tendency to rupture violently. Thousands of bathrooms were turned into porcelain war zones. One unlucky homeowner in Ohio described it as an ambush from below. The Consumer Product Safety Commission issued a recall after multiple injuries and countless shattered egos. The company's apology? Users may experience unexpected performance. Translation: your toilet might attack you. It remains one of the greatest examples of how innovation sometimes takes a seat and explodes. 48. The Great Internet Crash of 1998. Before memes, before social media meltdowns, there was one server in Virginia holding most of AOL's user data. On one hot July afternoon, a single technician tripped over a cable and disconnected it. Instantly, 30 million Americans lost internet access. Chaos ensued. News anchors panicked. Chat rooms went silent. Teenagers were forced to speak to their parents. AOL's CEO called it a temporary disruption, which is like calling the Titanic a brief dip. The outage lasted 19 hours and sparked the first true digital riot, with users flooding phone lines to complain about the thing they couldn't use. It was the dawn of a new age, the realization that one unplugged cord could end civilization faster than any disaster in history. Human history isn't just a list of achievements, it's a blooper reel with a body count. From cows accused of arson to NASA's metric meltdown, every disaster proves the same truth. We're just slightly smarter apes playing with fire, wires, and sometimes dynamite. Before you escape this video like a guilty politician, check out our other channel, Idiopedia. Even dumber, even funnier. You'll thank me later.